Okay, kids. This is the autumn equinox here in the northern hemisphere, and it's the spring equinox in the southern hemisphere. To Golden Dawn magicians, the equinoxes and the solstices were sort of like holidays, and I think the equinoxes were particularly important, mainly because of the balance between light and dark. And so in the Golden Dawn system of magic, balance of supposedly opposing forces is very important, mainly for manifestation. And many people who do sort of magic exoterically would say that the spring equinox is a great time for bringing things into manifestation, and maybe the autumnal equinox is a great time for making things disappear from manifestations. Not really, no. The best time, symbolically speaking, both of those times are good for bringing things into manifestation. Okay, so this whole idea of like polarity, things are coming out and then things are going away again, we know that sort of happens. But what's really happening is that things arise into appearance and then play themselves out and then dissipate. So there's not really a coming out and going back in. So the sun comes out of hibernation and then goes back into hibernation for the winter. No, manifestation is always happening. Okay, and when there is a balance between light and dark, supposedly then the duality of existence makes things clearer, and it makes things easier to manifest. This is important for this video today because we are talking about, if I can make it come up here on the slide, how to conjure demons. And so if you're conjuring a demon, having it materialize or come to some kind of visible appearance, it's helpful to have a sort of equilibrium between light and darkness. Okay, and for our purposes here, that's more like a separation between inside the magic circle and outside the magic circle. Okay, and this whole idea of demons arising and appearing and then playing out their little dramas and then dissipating, okay, that's important for how this process works. Okay, so in the sort of exoteric or in the vulgar way of looking at demon summoning, you conjure spirits and then you dominate them and subjugate them to the will of God, and then you put them to work in tasks to serve you. So that's a misunderstanding. Okay, so that is the exoteric view of magic, and it is propagated by those who do not understand what is actually happening. Okay, but it is interesting to say, or it's interesting to ask the question. This is done a lot now in sort of New Age circles. Actually, they'll say, "Is that behavior serving you any longer? In other words, or is that thing that you subscribe to, does that serve you? So remove the things from your life that no longer serve you." Okay, so when they do this, they're basically talking about the original meaning of demon summoning, and so conjuring up a demon to question it, to see whether it's still useful in your life. Okay, and then what? Sending it away so that it doesn't bother you anymore, or I don't need you anymore. Okay, that's a bit of a misunderstanding too. Okay, so we're going to dive into what actually demon summoning is for. And probably the best way to do it is to bring an example from literature. And this is an example of a failed demon summoning. In other words, a magician who didn't understand what he was doing, and he failed to carry out this operation correctly. with pretty tragic results, actually. And of course, those of you who know the poem, you already know how it ends. And but not many people notice that basically this is the conjuration of a spirit, and then a dialogue with the spirit, asking it questions, and then unfortunately what happens in the end, though, is that this spirit completely dominates the magician, and that this is a situation of horror, because that's not something you would want to happen when you conjure a demon. Okay, well, the odd thing is, though, the reason you conjure a demon is because it has been exerting power over you. Okay, it's a so what is a demon? A demon is a manifestation of past trauma. Okay, now the past trauma that it can be a manifestation of is not necessarily from this life. It can be from previous generations. Okay, I don't mean from past lives necessarily. I mean from previous generations, inherited through cell memory. Scientific evidence has shown that it is possible to inherit fears and desires from the experiences of your ancestors. Okay, that should be a no-brainer, really. Okay, so I mean, where do you suppose a healthy fear of heights comes from? It's inherited from some inherited memory. If there's inherited imagery going on in there, okay, so these images come back to us in the forms of fears or things like that, okay? Where does agoraphobia come from? We'll get to that in a moment. Agoraphobia is like fear of open spaces, or essentially fear of everything. Fear of being exposed out in the open. Okay. Now this poem, The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, the demon that comes up here, you could say it's a demon of loneliness. Okay, so, or it's a demon of abandonment, to take it even deeper. Okay, so many people have a fear of being rejected by their community, or rejected by their loved ones, okay, or by being rejected by a mate, or being abandoned by them, left to our own devices, and we might now die because we don't have any support, okay, or we won't be able to reproduce because we don't have a mate, a partner anymore, right? Nobody loves us. So that's a pretty deeply seated complex that almost everybody suffers from. And so Edgar Allan Poe goes after it in this classic poem. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. It's like a magician reading in his study, right? While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Okay, this is, I guess, is a reference to spirit tapping, maybe from the days of seances and things like that, right? And so something has started to happen. And notice he says, "while I nodded, nearly napping," okay, because for a magician, much of the work that he has done while he's awake in his magical ritual will begin to start happening in his dreams, and particularly between the liminal space between waking and sleep. He can experience some really cool stuff. Okay, and so maybe this is sort of an example of a magician who's tried to do a lot of work. It hasn't really worked so well, but now that he's let down his guard and he's going to sleep, now that work is starting to show him things. And so you might wonder whether he's actually really awake, or the tapping is kind of going on now on the astral plane while he's dreaming. And this is later in the poem. It's a lengthy poem, but we're not going to do the whole thing. "Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon the bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. So something's paying him a visit now in the form of some kind of trauma figure. Okay, so ravens were symbols of death, and mainly because they would lurk around the gallows when you hanged a criminal, and they would pluck out the eyes and eat the entrails and stuff like that. It was often a raven or a vulture who would do that. And of course the color is ominous, and the black for death. And the beak of the raven has a sort of hook, sort of like the reaping hook of Saturn, right? And so, yes, this demon has taken a symbolic form. And the fact that the form is winged, has wings, is probably important here. And then the poem ends. The poem is much longer than what I'm saying, of course, so these are just parts of it. The poem ends with the conjuration gone badly. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming. And the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. In this whole poem, he's pining for his lost wife, apparently, and she's dead, but he can't seem to let her go. And she is haunting him, and he can't seem to get over her death. And then he goes to his books to try to get some surcease of sorrow, and then drifts off to sleep, and then this demon comes to visit him. The spirit from the night's Plutonian shore comes to visit him. And you could say it's a representation of his own loneliness, his own independence, spirit of isolation, his own fear of death. Okay, and so he does have a dialogue with it, but he fails to deal with it in such a way that he is able to get out from under its control. And as you can see here in the end of the poem, he has been defeated by the demon, and it still gloats over his soul. In other words, he hasn't broken free from his grief. It still has him. Okay. How long will that grief last? Not forever, of course, but it feels like it's forever. Like you have to have a few chances to break free of it, and then if you don't break free, then you're trapped forever. This kind of plays upon the idea of hell being forever. Nothing's really forever. But of course, if you are immersed in sorrow, mourning for someone you've lost, it feels like it's going to be forever. And in a sense, they're dead. They're never going to be back in that form again. So yeah, it is kind of permanent, isn't it? So what should the character in that poem have done? What should the narrator have done in order to correctly or successfully carry out a demon invocation? Okay. Before we get into that, there might be some criticism about, so Liam is basically going into literature to talk about how magic works. Doesn't he realize magic is real and literature is just metaphors? And so my response to that is that you need to understand that literature and the arts is where we banished magic to try to convince ourselves that it's not real. Okay? That's a very important point. So the metaphors that we experience in the psyche, those metaphors are the spirits. They're not simply merely metaphors. They are the spiritual forces that they supposedly represent. Okay? Same goes for when you draw a sigil in the air. Symbols are the forces they represent. Okay? This is a different take on magic. Okay, it's sort of the ancient Egyptian take on magic. The words of power are the spirits. The metaphors are the magical power. The metaphors are the spiritual power. Okay. All right. So, one thing about summoning demons is truly horrifying. And Poe doesn't touch upon that in The Raven. He simply goes over a failed attempt to get out from under a demon. Okay. You can see that you might conjure demons, so you basically it's an attempt to get out from under it, so that it doesn't take you over anymore and possess you and control you and compel you to do things. All right. And that's not the horrifying part. So we're going to get to the truly horrifying part of demonic evocation. Sorry. So let's go into meditation for a bit. So those of you who don't like meditation, you might take some comfort in my description of it as being not very effective. Okay, but mainly because the way that we are taught to do meditation in the modern world is to monitor our thoughts, or maybe pay attention to bodily sensations, pay attention to what's around you, stay present, and also to pay attention to your thoughts as they come up. Okay. And if you get carried away and you stop paying attention to them, and that you find that you've gotten carried away, you bring yourself back again and then continue to focus on your thoughts or your bodily sensations. Okay. And why do we do this? Well, we do this because we supposedly have a monkey mind. Okay, so our mind has the tendency to just think all over the place, and of course the thoughts we are thinking conjure up all these stressful scenarios that aren't even happening, and we worry ourselves to death, because the mind is going round and round with all kinds of anxieties. And supposedly then we meditate to de-stress and sort of calm down the monkey mind so it stops producing all these fantasy scenarios of stress that are stressing us out. And so presumably once we have the monkey mind settled down, we simply now have legitimate forms of stress to deal with, and we have eliminated all of the extra, not necessary stress that the monkey mind produces. Okay. The only problem with this idea is that the thoughts that are bubbling up on the surface of your mind, they are really on the surface of your mind. What's going on down there in the depths? Where are these thoughts coming from? Okay, now it's not really possible for us to delve down into the mind to see the source of the thoughts. Are we going to start looking at nerve cells or something like that? Like how do we? So it seems like, all we can do is focus on what bubbles up on the surface, and I guess that's all we can focus on. That's all there is, right? Think about that. So all we have is what's on the surface? So rather than just focus on the thoughts or the sensations that are happening right now, you can turn your attention to the thing that is generating them. Okay, it's possible to do that. And in order to do that, you have to have some literary skill or some artistic skill. This is why magic is both an art and a science. You have to have some skill with symbols, metaphors, imagination. Okay. And so if somebody were to try to teach me to meditate, I would very quickly criticize the procedure, saying, wait, hold on. Why am I just focusing on the thoughts? Where are these thoughts coming from? Let's focus there. So the point is, let's not just focus on the thoughts. Let's focus on the monkey himself. What does he look like? How does he behave? What triggers him? And what does he look like at various times? Are there other monkeys down in there? Okay. And so you can use your faculty for personification or animism or anthropomorphism. These are all psychic abilities. These are not just literary terms. Remember, magic was banished into literature and the arts to, so that we could keep ourselves safe from it, right? Okay, well, it's still magic. So when we do symbolism and metaphor and personifications and visualizations, we then can tap into the things that are generating what's happening on the surface. Okay, so when I decide to look at the monkey himself, this entity within me that's having all of these worrisome thoughts, apparently, right? What does he look like? How does he act? How does he move? What triggers him? Okay, and it can be pretty amazing what we discover when we start to do that, when we let the imagery arise. Okay. And we can maybe even talk about, so when it comes to the Edgar Allan Poe poem, there, the thing that was causing the worrisome thoughts that were going round and round in his head, I'm alone, I'll never get her back, she's gone forever, around and round and round, like, and the point is to be free of that. And so the first step was to essentially notice what's happening. The second step was then to have the spirit appear in some kind of form so you can talk to it. Okay? Why would you just talk to the thoughts that it's generating round and round? The thoughts aren't really going to do anything. They're not going to dialogue with you necessarily. They're just going to keep erupting or going round and round. It's better to go after the sort of entity in there that is generating the thoughts and then have a conversation with it. What a novel concept. Okay? It's not novel at all. People have, from ancient cultures, prehistoric cultures, have known this since before the dawn of civilization. And somehow we have lost this. And of course now we practice magic to get it back. This ability to work with the supposedly deep aspects of the mind. Okay. And so we have this idea of standing in your magic circle, conjuring a demon. Okay, this little image comes from the monster manual of Dungeons and Dragons. So much of what is being circulated in the world in regard to magic comes from legitimate practices that at one time were used to basically dialogue with your demons, to set yourself free from them. Okay, not only to set yourself free from them, but to make friends with them, to understand them. Okay, and to do that, we draw magic circles. Okay, if we don't engage in ceremonial magic and draw the magic circle with chalk on the floor or whatever like that, in our minds, we are still doing this anyway. Okay, we make a concept out of ourself, which basically means to circumscribe myself with a sort of concept bubble, making a thing out of me, and then I of course draw a circle around something else out there that's like, this is the thing that is bothering with me. I'm giving it some kind of form out there, so I'm drawing a circle around it too. Okay, now I can think more objectively, because in order to think objectively, I have created two objects, me and the thing that's bothering me. Okay, and this is what happens in the Poe poem. Okay, something is causing lots of troublesome thoughts for him. He's depressed. His wife died. I'm alone. She left me. I'm never going to be happy again. Blah, 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 right? And processing all those thoughts can be difficult, but you can use magical evocation to get through the process. Okay, just to see through it, to see what's really happening. Okay. And in order to do that, we can use animism. So in other words, animism, the thing within the narrator of the poem that was causing him all the worrisome thoughts about being alone and left behind and mortal and all this stuff, it now takes on a form before him so he can have a conversation with it and make peace with it. That's a possibility. Doesn't always work, though. Can be a bit dangerous, can't it? Maybe Poe was warning us about that. Was Poe a magician? I think he might have been, actually, but because there's stuff in his writing where at least he studied the magic and things like that. Okay, this wizard here is standing inside the pentagram. Well, the pentagram, if you think about how it works, would normally be outside the magic circle, and it would be used to conjure the spirit, and I'll show you why. Normally outside the magic circle you have the thaumaturgic triangle, the triangle of conjuration, and so the magician would stand inside his magic circle, and notice the pentagrams are on the outside, and then we have the triangle of manifestation on the outside as well. On the inside we have the hexagrams. How interesting. Okay, this is very much like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, which the Golden Dawn taught as a primary method for doing something, right? For banishing, supposedly, right? Banishing and invoking, and apparently for evoking or conjuring demons. And so the triangle of manifestation would be outside the magic circle because it represents an avenue of approach. And if you think about even the way that folk witches or hoodoo practitioners had the legend of the crossroads, you go to the crossroads and then conjure the devil. Okay, imagine that's really going to the crossroads is kind of like going into an agoraphobia scenario. Remember, agoraphobia is fear of being vulnerable and out in the open. I could be attacked from any direction at any moment. So standing at the crossroads is like, I could be attacked from any direction now. Oh my God. That's putting yourself into a scenario where, okay, now my demons can arise and, okay, show me what you got. Come at me, threaten me. Okay, so that's, going to the crossroads is kind of like that. And so when somebody does the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, it's very much the same. It's you have the 4 directions, and you have the 4 elements that you are conjuring up, and not only that, but spirits of the very powerful spirits of the 4 elements. Okay, they both represent the elements as sort of threats. Okay, elemental forces are dangerous, right? But also as sort of rescuers, like to try to protect you from those forces. Okay. Protectors, guardians. So this is you representing yourself as being on guard against whatever's out there. And that's very important. Okay, in the early magical work for somebody who's in the outer order of the Golden Dawn, the way the Golden Dawn exists nowadays, the primary work is done through banishment, and you're not really conjuring demons deliberately. You're simply banishing all the negative influences from your life. But what does that do? It pushes them out into the periphery where they can now start to appear in various forms in your life, okay, as worrisome thoughts, as actual psychic images that trouble you. Okay, and these images tend to come in the forms of snakes, creatures with horns and fangs and claws, or threatening natural forces like tidal waves and fire and lightning, hurricane winds, avalanches. Okay. I think snakes and dogs, or snakes and wolves, were kind of big for me in the psychic imagery. I felt like sometimes I was being attacked, by phantoms. Was not that big a deal though. And so, of course, it for the outer order student of the Golden Dawn, he's gradually getting attuned to how this works. When I draw a circle around myself, I'm now portraying myself as a fortress against all the negativity out there. So the negativity or the things that are producing troublesome thoughts and worrisome scenarios in my mind all the time can now manifest before my waking eyes, okay, or in my dreams, so that I can now dialogue with them and make peace with them, okay, and where does the student in the outer order do that? He does that in his journal. In other words, he just writes about the stuff that happened every day in his journal, and that's a prelude to his ability to make peace with demons directly, okay? But in the outer order, we're just tuning ourselves into that process. We're not necessarily conjuring a particular demon yet. I think you can see where this is going now, right? All right. And of course, outside the magic circle is the triangle of manifestation, which simply represents you standing at the crossroads. Okay, and where does something appear? When a spirit appears on one of those roads that are converging in upon you. You stand at the crossroads, you're sort of vulnerable now, and any spirit can now attack you from any direction, okay? Or any troublesome scenario can now pop up to bother you and make you have worrisome thoughts, okay? And so, lo and behold, something might appear in the space outside your circle, and it appears on one of those roads because you're at the crossroads, right? Okay, so one of those angles of approach that you were worried about is now delivering some kind of, oh, there's a spirit, there's a manifestation of past trauma that I can now make peace with. And as you can see, it appears within the triangle of manifestation or on that roadway. Okay, and that's why the pentagrams are normally outside the circle, because they are essentially personification symbols. It can be helpful too, because if there's something bothering us that's really raw, like a natural disaster or something like that, anthropomorphizing it can really help us then dialogue with it. Okay, there's a lot to be said about that too. I think my next video might be about hell, actually. Hell and the hexagram. I think it's going to be, yeah. The idea of hell, like the place of torment in the underworld, and the hexagram and the pentagram. Yeah, it should be an interesting video. It is interesting too, because conjuring up a demon, something that is troubling you, is sort of like conjuring something from the abyss that is lurking out there, but it's been so vague you couldn't really put your finger on what it was. So you sit down to do some magical work to try to conjure this thing up so that you can see it more clearly. And then if it doesn't come to you or appear to you, you give it a form with your imagination. You give it that form. You use your faculty for symbolism and personification and animism and imagination to give it form so that you can have conversations with it. And so we come to the procedure. Okay, so just to back up again, the student of magic in the outer order doesn't really know how to do this very well yet. Okay, but the process of doing banishings every day tends to push these various troublesome entities out into the periphery of the imaginal space, where they can spontaneously begin to take on form in his thoughts, in his dreams, or even before his waking eyes as psychic imagery, so that he can begin to make sense out of them. And mostly, in the outer order, we just make sense of what's happening to us in our magical journal, and to figure out, to give it some kind of meaning, speculate about what it is, where it's coming from, how these experiences are arising, how they relate to my karma and things I have to process, okay? And eventually, by the time you become an adept and you reach the 5=6 grade, you get a clue. You begin to notice, oh, now I see what's happening. Okay, then you can really get serious about the work and go after particular demons. The ones that have been troubling you all your life but have always sort of eluded you. Now that you know how this thing works, you can actually go after them and give them a form in your imagination that you can have a dialogue with. Okay, and then of course, do they talk back to you? Yes, they do. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a bit too. It's like, what if I'm not psychic? Doesn't really matter. So let's go over the procedure. Okay, the procedure is to draw a magic circle around yourself at the very least. Okay, it helps to be really formal about it, so to charge it with, divine names, words of power, to do it in a ritualistic, time invested way or energy invested way. Okay, we'll talk about different ways to do that, but obviously the most hardcore way of doing that is to have a magic circle. You draw it around yourself with a dagger or with a wand or something like that, or even draw a circle with chalk on the floor. Okay, and then you're standing within that circle, and then outside of that circle, things can then begin to appear, like on the view screen of your imagination. Okay, and in order to help them appear, you also give them a circle of their own. Okay, I'm going to give you this area to appear in where you can take on and some kind of objectifiable form. Okay, so the first step is to draw the magic circle. The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram is an excellent way of doing that. Okay, also the hexagram ritual. And then of course, then you can sit down and rise to face the demon. Okay, so that's where you're going to start to call up the emotions and the scenarios that have been triggering you and troubling you. Okay, or the thoughts that have been recurring that you would like to go away. Okay, remember, these thoughts and these scenarios that are triggering you, those are all surface-oriented things. We're not really getting at the monkey itself yet, the demon itself, right? Okay, so and then you kind of imagine yourself like, okay, I have arisen in this form, me, to deal with this particular troublesome thing. Okay, this is you rising to face the demon. Okay, so in other words, you have these emotions and troublesome feelings going on inside your magic circle. Okay, and then of course you could then imagine the same feelings erupting outside the magic circle in some kind of form, in the form of what's troubling you, maybe. Okay, but what you'll often find is that the thing that begins to appear is the same. Is that this is the behavioral impulse that tends to bother you, to try that routinely takes you over, makes you do things that you regret. What does it look like? Okay, so normally if it's a problem, it comes in and takes you over and makes you do things out unconsciously that you regret later. Okay, and if you observing that outside the circle gives you some power over it now. Okay, and then of course you can give it a form that it appears in. It might begin to arise in its own form spontaneously. Give it a chance. But if it doesn't, go ahead and come up with a form that you think it might take. Okay, there really isn't much difference between just going ahead and giving something a form or allowing that form to arise spontaneously. Okay. I'll just give you a quick example of that. When Carl Jung was doing psychotherapy with his patients, some of them thought that his dream interpretation stuff was really all silly and nonsense, and so they would just humor him and invent dreams that he would ask what they dreamt last night, and they would be like, well, I'll just make up something. I'll make up some outrageous dream just to play around with him. Okay, so that so that he won't actually go after the issue that's really troubling me. Like, it's too painful, right? So they start to conjure up this nonsense dream that they never had at night, and then he would begin to go after this dream anyway, as though it happened. Okay, and he probably knew that they were making it up. He could probably tell. Didn't matter, because whatever they conjured up in that playful sort of let's see if we can fool Jung, right? whatever they conjured up still was being fed by whatever their current anxiety or trauma or karma is forcing them to process. Okay, so even when you think you're just making stuff up randomly and willy-nilly, that's not really possible. So the stuff that you make up and try to be silly with, it's always going to have some kind of symbolic and important form, something to show you. This is why the magician will tell, like an adept will tell his students, it's not really possible for you to lie to me. Whatever lies you conjure up are also representative of what's going on with you. I can always tell. Okay, so what this means is, if you think there's no demon out there taking on some kind of manifestation, I guess this isn't working. Well, go ahead and make up a form that it appears in. Okay, and that form that you sort of ad lib and just you think you're just making it up randomly, it's not random. Okay, so it's basically coming out of the same kind of space as your anxiety is coming out of, or as your fear is coming out of, okay, or as your troublesome desire is coming out of. The demon rises. Okay, so it takes on some kind of form, a form that you give it, or a form that it seems to spontaneously assume anyway. That form can have all kinds of things. Could be animal form, could have multiple limbs, could be a chimeric form, like it could have different animal body parts attached to it, something like that. It could be vaporous, could be liquid, okay, all kinds of things. Could take the form of a spark of electricity, or a ripple on the surface of water. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's something that can be contained within that sort of, triangle of manifestation, or something that can be objectified. Okay, the demon rises. And so when it's appeared, you can then ask it the 3 questions. Now here's where the experience comes into play. So somebody who has been doing the magical work and has a lot of experience in confronting the psyche will be able to answer these questions proficiently and get answers that are actually useful. Okay. Somebody who is not yet very mature in spiritual practice might not be able to handle the 3 questions very well. Yeah, it just depends on being experienced with magic. Okay, some people are natural at it. Some people are pretty good at it. Don't need a lot of experience. Okay, most of us do. And this thing we need experience at is art, literature, symbolism, language, metaphor, simile. Okay. Not necessarily in a scientific way, but more of in a literary sort of way, and in a drama sort of way. So theater majors are really good at doing stuff like this. The 3 questions are very simple. What do you want? Question number 2. What do you really need? Question number 3. And how will you feel when you get what you really need? Okay, so you might imagine the narrator in the poem The Raven saying, what do you want? And the raven says, as a manifestation of his own hurt, might be like, I want Lenore back. I want my wife back. I'm so devastated that she died. I want her back. And then the second question is, what do you really need? And this is where the experience comes into play, because it's basically, what you really need is asking for the transpersonal answer. What really needs to happen here? So it's not really what you need anymore. it's more like saying, the first question was, what do you want? Okay. Second question is, what really needs to happen here? Okay. And that's more of a transpersonal answer. And so the raven in that situation might say, I need to be free of this grief. I need to be free of Lenore. I need to get over this, move on. Okay, and then of course, question number 3 is, how will you feel when you get what you really need? And there might be a simple answer, or it might just be a feeling, like, or both, right? And of course, the raven has wings, doesn't it? The raven will be free. It'll spread its wings and fly away and not bother him ever again. Bye-bye. Okay, until he loses somebody else, and it might come back again, and then he can... But this, when it comes back again, it'll be more like of a friend. It won't be more like this troublesome demon. It might even have a different form. No longer the raven of death. Who knows? So, yeah, question 3, how will you feel when you get what you really need? And then the next step is to feed the demon. You feed it what it needs. Okay? And so in your form, you basically see up from the earth this sort of nectar rising up, like say you're a flower, okay? So the nectar rises up like comes up into your body as though you're some kind of a plant, and then the nectar rises up into the flower, okay? Because that nectar is now going to feed the demon, and you can see that nectar streaming out in whatever form as that feeling. So the feeling that, when you asked the demon, how will you feel? So this feeling of freedom, which might be sort of sky blue energy, or maybe with hints of gold in it, or something like that, right? Or maybe lots of fluttering wings inside it. The stream of freedom feeling will be coming out of you into that image of the raven. And then you watch, where from you does it come? Does it come out of the heart, as I imagine it might do here? Or does it come like out of the forehead? Okay, or just kind of indistinctly out from you? Okay, out the mouth, out of the breasts, like you're suckling an infant, right? And then how does the demon take it in? Into the heart, into the eyes, into the mouth. Okay, you want to visualize these things, okay? Just like into the heart of its sort of vaporous mass, whatever. And then you watch what happens as you feed in this nectar, okay? And you want to picture or conceptualize this nectar that's rising in you. It has an unlimited supply. It'll never run out. It's coming right out of the earth herself. It's rising up from the earth through you into space, and then out there into the demon to feed the demon, and the demon is now taking in that feeling, in this case, the feeling of freedom from grief, right? And then you feed the demon all that it seems to need, and you just observe what happens to it as it receives what it really needs to feel. Okay, so it might dissolve entirely and just simply, there's nothing there. Or turn into pure light, might take another form, might take a more aggressive form, because many demons can become allies. It depends, right? There's some types of human instinct and human reactivity that will never go away. They're too deeply embedded into what we are as a species. Okay, so the process of feeding the demon is basically just coming to terms with it, making friends with it, so it's no longer a problem, understanding it. And what you'll notice here is that the only way to do this is through compassion. It's really a matter of this thing that's been arising within me, I have to empathize with it. I have to understand the real pain, not just the thing that it thought it needed, but what it actually needs. Okay, and that's something that is experienced in the heart. Yeah, which means that demon summoning is not really something that a psychopath could do. You have to have empathy to do it. Yeah. Then there are the final questions you asked, and those are pretty cool. They're very magical, sorcerous questions. I'm not going to go into those, okay? But you can find those in an article in Forbidden Realms. It's called Magical Evocation Part 2, I think. Yeah. There's an article in Forbidden Realms called Magical Evocation Part 2, where I do give what those final questions are, okay? This whole procedure's in that article. And then the final step is the clear light. So eventually, if that spirit hasn't dissolved already, eventually it does, you do allow it to dissolve into pure light. Not only that, but you also allow yourself to dissolve into pure light. Because there's something very interesting about that. In step 2, you rose to face the demon. In step 3, the demon rose up. Okay, so the two of you have co-arisen. The two of you are co-creating, you could say, right? Okay, and there's something a little frightening about that, because but what you notice here is that as the demon dissolves, so do you. Okay, if I don't have my fears and my desires and the things that trouble me, do I even exist? Do I really want to be free of my demons? Because then it's like I don't exist. I can't seem to... In other words, we define ourselves by the things that offend us and the things that trigger us and the things that please us. And when those things don't... When we don't need those things to do that anymore, do we still exist? This might begin to show you why people seem to enjoy being offended, why they seem to cling to suffering, because if they weren't suffering, it would feel like they're slipping away. All right, so conjuring demons through magical ritual, okay, might seem like a bit much, okay? And for somebody who's doing the Kabbalah magic work, I don't recommend doing it, because as I said, you're basically just learning how the psyche works by doing the daily banishings and writing about your experiences in your journal, okay? However, you could still go to your journal and write a little short story about a sorcerer who conjures a particular demon and then has a conversation with it and then lets it go, okay? And to get a good handle on that, you might go look up Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and see that as a failed attempt. So watch what happens as he dialogues with that demon and then see how he doesn't free himself from it. It's basically, at the end, it's gloating over him and he's in its shadow. And he's at least a failed attempt, okay? Of course, doesn't mean he can't try again. It feels like he's going to be stuck there forever, like he's damned for all eternity, right? All right, the true horror, okay? What is the true horror of magical evocation, of demons? Well, one of the horrors is that the things that you are afraid of or the things that are troubling you we tend to view them as out there. Okay, they're safely outside the magic circle, and it's like, yeah, we keep them out there because they bother us. We keep them away from us, right? And one of the horrifying things about that is you begin to realize that, oh, no, it's able to come inside my magic circle and take me over sometimes. Okay, and so these various horror films show that, like, we've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. It's a famous line from a movie, When a Stranger Calls, I believe it is, right? And so why is that such a scary part of the film? It's just kind of matter of fact, right? So the intruder is actually inside the house, right? That resonates really deeply because the demons that haunt us aren't really out there. We are somehow, through our own negligence, letting them in. There's the horrifying part, right? Actually, no. That's a little bit of horror. Now, the truly horrifying part is the final straw, pretty much, the final blow to the ego. And this little scene is from the movie The Sixth Sense. It's about a psychologist who is helping a little boy who can see dead people. And all through the film, he doesn't realize, as he's helping this boy, who has apparently a legitimate psychic gift for seeing dead people, the psychologist all through the film doesn't realize that he himself is dead. Until the end, of course. And then that's quite a shock for everybody in the audience as well. It's a shock to him, and it's a shock to everybody in the audience. It's like, all this time he's been dead. Oh my God. Why does that resonate so strongly? People will say, oh, that's just a brilliant plot twist, and that's all there is to it. Okay. Well, when it comes to things like the things that bother us, the spirits that bother us, the behaviors that take us over on a regular basis, as we arise to face these things that are troubling us, okay, that thing that arises is also a spirit, is also a demon. Okay, so in other words, you yourself are a demon. And in order to really be free of suffering, you yourself also must dissolve and disappear. That's why it's funny, in this movie, The Sixth Sense, it's both horrifying and beautiful at the same time. It's liberating when he finally realizes that he's already dead. And this is like you realizing that my ego doesn't even exist. It's just a spirit. It's just a demon, and it can evaporate in a second. Then what? What's left of me then? And that can really be a shock to the system. So all these legends, about the sorcerer and the wizard and his apprentice, and the wizard turns to the apprentice and said, if I showed you the things that I do in my magic right now, if I showed it to you all at once, they would terrify you and drive you crazy and drive you insane, right? You would flee from here in terror. That's kind of true. Okay, because the kind of work that the adept has to do, the kind of work that the adept does requires that he is no longer even there. It's gone. Okay, so in order to work with the magical forces and things like that, you have to realize that you don't exist. And for the new student of magic, that's the last thing they want. They're doing magic because they're trying to firm up their sense of identity and existence. And the actual thing that this magical evocation does is it eventually shows you that you are just a spirit like all these other things that are eventually going to dissolve into pure light. You're already dead. You were never alive to begin with. And so if you go through an ego death, well, what's left? What's left of you? Okay, so, and the way I define ego is that compulsiveness. Okay, so when the ego dies, that means the automatic or unconscious affrontedness that it experiences as it faces off with things in the world, that's gone. Okay, we still face things in the world to deal with them, but it's not done in an unconscious way anymore. And so many people would say, well, the ego still exists then, doesn't it? No, it depends how you define it. So once the ego is dead, it's dead. And all that's left is the persona, because you still have to arise in a form to take care of this and that. but it's no longer compulsive anymore. It's no longer reactionary. Okay, and for the adept, somebody who's not completely enlightened like a Buddha, okay, it doesn't mean that they are totally conscious all the time. But essentially what it means is that if an unconscious impulse arises, if a demon arises, he'll catch it before it takes him over. Because he's done enough of this kind of work to catch it before it takes over his behavior and controls him. Okay, so he still has all of these troublesome instincts, all these troublesome fears, that he's human, right? But he is able to catch them as they arise. And he's probably made friends with a lot of them already. And many of them he has dissolved entirely, or he has dissolved them entirely, and he has dissolved himself in regard to them entirely. They don't even exist for him anymore. And somebody who's an adept will sometimes look at, their students and be puzzled for a moment, because the adept has already forgotten what it was like to experience that kind of trouble. It's like, what's the problem here? And then he has to remember, oh, that's right. I used to have this same demon, and it's gone now. It's hard to remember what that was like. It even disappears from memory, almost. Like it was like a bad dream. Yeah, and it's never really happened to begin. It was never really there to begin with. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I think maybe next video we'll talk about hell and the hexagram and the pentagram. All right, so until next time.